Men of Reddit who proposed, and she said no. What happened afterwards with your life? Very first girlfriend ever. Started dating at 17. After 6 years of dating I proposed. She said no. I'm sorry. I asked why. She said, I've been thinking about this for a while, but didn't talk to you about it. I found someone else. Then she broke up with me right then and there. I asked if she cheated, and she said no. We are just friends right now. But he makes me happy when I'm with him and you just don't. You used to, but not anymore. I tried sabotaging their relationship when I found him begging her for nudes, tattled to her ultra-Christian parents that he was twice her age, which he is, and did everything I could to be the insane one. Finally realized what I was doing, apologized, promised to never talk to her or her family ever again. I sold the ring and used the money to buy a guitar and a boatload of weed and spiraled out of control for 3 years. Flunked all my classes, got a dead-end job at a construction gig, slowly descended into borderline alcoholism. Couldn't leave the house, or go to work, or do my job without being high. Gained a ton of weight, let myself go. Finally contemplated suicide, planned it out with a 20-page instruction manual on how to make it painless, not screw it up, and not hurt anyone in the process. Never went through with it, because I kept getting scared and spending my suicide fund on weed and alcohol. Finally broke down and told my parents all of this. Asked for help. Spent another year in a rehab program with a therapist. Got out and have been clean for 3 years by this September and still wake up at 3 AM feeling sick every couple of months for the way I treated her after having spent 6 years telling her that I loved her. But that's all over now, and all I can do is learn from it, promise to be better, and keep going. So now I'm turning 29 in a week, still living at home with parents, and constantly battling self-loathing and anxiety, while working a job for $9.25 an hour. But I'd pay my parents $300 a month to stay with them, and I'm going back to school. Taking the minimum number of credit hours per semester, since I'm paying for it out of pocket, and I work full-time and overtime when I can get it, but slowly dragged my GPA from a 1.28 to a 2.64, and can start getting help next semester instead of paying for all of it out of pocket. Now, I also lost a ton of weight during the pandemic and weigh just 189. Now, in rehab I dropped to 220, but I was closer to 245 to 250 before that. Safe to say I won't be worth dating for a long time, but maybe when I get my degree under my belt and finish growing and learning I can get a self-sustaining job I can move out and truly start over. Edit. Hey guys, I'm getting a swath of PMs asking what the number one thing was that helped me through that time, and I'm saying without a single doubt that punk rock did it, and going to punk concerts. This song by my all-time favorite band the Flatliners was my wake-up song and best bud song. Girlfriend helped me realize that if I wanted to try and make my own music it can be short and punchy, as long as it's from the heart. My mom rejected my father the first 2 times, lol. There was no real hard feelings between them. I guess my mother was just not ready for marriage yet. She ended up proposing to him. My grandmother and mother sewed a suit for their dog to wear and attached a sign around his neck with a ring that read, "Will you marry me?" Then she sent the dog out into the kitchen to beg for scraps while my father was preparing dinner. The next thing she heard was a very concerned voice shouting, "Honey, the dog is asking me to marry him." Cue. Absolute hysterics. My dad said yes to the proposal. My human dad and my human mom are still married 2 decades later. The fact that I even had to clarify this is severely disappointing. TSK, TSK, TSK. Edit 1. My parents found the photo. They are just getting it sent, so stay tuned, and I will post the pet tax. Edit 2. My god, you guys are more impatient than kids at an ice cream truck. Here is your pet tax. Haha. http imgur.com/mka34. Edit 3. You're La Savage. Give the old good boy a breakpoint. Edit 4. I find it humorous that my photo has more views than this thread has upvotes. So I guess I just wanna say hello to all of the lurkers out there. I hope you all have a wonderful morning/day/evening/night. I swear I'm not trying to be passive aggressive. Just realize that it could come across that way. My mum actually said no to my dad's proposal when they were younger. Not because they weren't in love, but because she wasn't sure if it was something she actually wanted to do, rather than something that society expected of her, or whatever. They still stayed together and had kids, hence why you're reading this now. And then when my dad was terminally ill a few years ago, my mum plucked up the courage and asked him point, just to get her back after all those years. He said no, before taking her up on the offer a few days later. He died a happy man. Edit. Holy shit, I uploaded this before bed and haven't been on Reddit since. Just flicked it on to see all of your lovely responses. Really does mean the world to hear people taking some joy from their story. Thanks so much. For a bit more context on this, it was actually 2 declined proposals, not just one, both pre-children too, so let's say I'm lucky. Also, when they did get married, it wasn't purely an action for the estate or whatever they already had, wills etc. point sorted. It was just one of those last great days as a family. In fact, my sister and I were the only 2 present at the registry office. And when I say office, they literally squeezed us into one of the registrar's offices as there was a big waiting list for weddings and we didn't know how long he had. He died 3 months later, so we were all hugely grateful for them for helping us out like that. Not sure if this count, but I proposed. She said yes, but 1 month before the wedding she took it back. This is what happened immediately with my life. I personally lost about $3,000 worth of deposits. My parents and her parents lost about $4,000 each on deposits. Me and my parents are working class, so it took years for us to financially recover from this. I spent $2,200 on a ring I didn't want. My biggest regret, and will say this anyone who listens, the engagement ring chain I bought it from wouldn't take it back. I took it to pawn shops and they'd only offer a few hundred. This engagement ring store bank on customers who wants the whole ring, stone, band, setting. If you're going to buy a ring, just buy the stone or gold band setting. You can get a better deal from a local jewelry store. Apparently my gem I bought was cheap. Most of the cost of the ring was BS. Most of my family was from out of state, and a lot of people were pissed because they cancelled their flight. I had to go to the so I didn't leave my room. I couldn't take any calls because everyone was pissed and I didn't want to hear it. I was depressed and just stayed in bed. One day my roommate grabbed me and took me to the where the doctor treated me for severe dehydration and an infection. What happened? When I got over it, I became stronger for it. I didn't propose to anyone until a decade later. Honestly, there wasn't anyone that I didn't love deeply enough to be in a committed relationship. But when I proposed I was in my 30s. A relationship was more mature than my first time I proposed. We are now married for 13 years. She's my best friend. When I have good news, she's the first person I want to tell it to. When I have bad news, she's the first person I want to tell it to. I financially recovered as well. I learned my lesson about the engagement ring. Only paid $300 for it. She loved it and treasures it. After our 10-year milestone we were doing so well, I told her to pick a wedding ring of any cost. She refused. She still wears that cheap $300 ring and loves it. In 2017, Google came up with this idea to allow you to make photo books out of your Google Photos account. My girlfriend and I had been dating for almost 2 years and I knew she was the one I wanted to marry. So I created this wonderful photo book of all of our selfies together and ended it with a page made out of a photo I generated that said, "Will you marry me?" I then proceeded to put all these things into an album and build the photo book. What didn't occur to me at the time was that the album I put these in was a shared album and the other person gets a notification when you add new photos to it. And the other person that the album was shared with, my girlfriend. That evening, we had dinner and it all came out. She saw the photo. She wasn't ready. There were a few reasons why, but they were good reasons and smart reasons, mostly to do with timing, family, and finances. We weren't breaking up. We just weren't getting engaged at that time. A year later, we have fully discussed the concept of getting married. We went ring shopping. She picked her own ring, and by the time I actually did propose we both knew what her answer would be. We celebrated our first wedding anniversary in April. It seems to have worked out so far, and the photo book is on a shelf to my left as we speak. We received a letter from the immigration office saying that she was lacking some documents. At the moment we were stressed, both of us, with work and study, and none of us were sufficiently fluent in German to decipher this kind of language. We went to the university office for foreign students. The lady in charge translated to us the letter badly, telling us that even presenting the documents they would proceed with the deportation process. We panicked. Looking for some more help, we ended in the city hall. With the adrenaline rush, I proposed to her in quite a loud voice, if we get married, could we stop the deportation? I asked the poor guy in the information office, I can't remember, if he gave us an answer. I want to marry her. Will you marry me? She started laughing. I started laughing. The guy in the office gave us the telephone to the pertinent department and asked us to call. We went out of the city hall and we couldn't stop laughing. She said to me, well, thank you, but let's wait a bit. After the weekend we went to immigration office and the people there explained which documents were missing, how to get them. She wasn't denied the visa, and we kept living in the way we planned. It was intense, and, in retrospective, really funny. Addendum, we are not married, and never planned, but we live together. She got a job that provides her with a visa. Soon she will present herself to citizenship exam. It was absolutely horrible at first. I legit thought my life was ending, as shortly after that she wanted to take a break. Pretty much she wanted to date her co-worker at Baker's Square and had a really weird cultish relationship with all her co-workers. At first I was confused / upset, all of the above. But weirdly enough, one of her friends / acquaintance for me contacted me since she knew I was in a rough patch, completely innocently, and we hung out, and she even knew that I wanted to get back together with her at some point, so it wasn't anything immediate. Eventually, the girl I proposed to found out her co-worker boy toy was a douche and wanted to get back together with me, and obviously I had been fretting about it for like 3 months, so I instantly said yes, even though unknowingly I started forming a bond with her friend / my acquaintance. Slowly, things just started deteriorating as I started getting honestly kind of suspicious that she wanted to get together with one of her other co-workers, and surprisingly I was actually right. She ended up breaking up with me again, and I thought I was gonna go through it all again, but this time the shock only lasted a few days, since this time I kind of had closure. Meanwhile, somehow I think the friend / my acquaintance / current girlfriend of 4 years knew that this was gonna happen and was there for me when I needed it. Like both times for me, it was super rough, couldn't even function. Got together, and honestly I can't even understand how I thought I was happy with my old girlfriend who I proposed to. I even look back, and I'm realizing that even her family was faked up. Her mom was extremely controlling, and even, disgustingly, bragged about how she dated a boy in high school for a few years, and broke up with him, and hurt his feelings so bad that he moved for mental health reasons. Like, I guess the apple didn't fall far from the tree. To be quite honest though, I miss her dad a lot. Like honestly, he messages me every once in a while. I doubt his daughter knows, and basically I can just hear it in his voice that he would rather her date me than her new boyfriend, since I had a pretty good bond with him. Even so, I still don't like to message back with anything too much, since I'd somehow weirdly feel like it's cheating on my current girlfriend who has the most chill parents I've ever met and are super easygoing. I honestly think my life would have been hell if I chose to marry my past girlfriend with a mom-in-law problem. Anyways, that's my story. Thanks for reading. It had been 5 years. Things had gotten a bit rocky. We've both worked the same incredibly time-demanding job, and it had kept us apart, despite living together, for the better part of 2 years. The promise of a 6-figure salary made it hard to let go of and do the right thing, and I proposed in a last-ditch effort to save the relationship. I'll never forget that moment. At that moment she looked at me, roses on the floor, ring in hand, and with cold eyes, filled with sadness and a sprinkle of pity, just said no. She left for a coworker that I had hired a year before, a man 20 years older than either of us, and as a person I shattered. Up until this point society, family, friends had all reinforced that I was living life the way it should be lived. Financial security, wealth above my needs, a long-term relationship, hell, we were getting a house. In an instant all that came crashing down around me. What followed after was the single most devastating time of my life. I couldn't work. They were there. I tried but got pulled off the job. Never happens on the railroad. They will literally work you to death by another supervisor and sent to get checked at the hospital. They took me off on stress leave. Within a month I had stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped doing literally anything, didn't answer the phone, just laid there on the couch with Netflix endlessly streaming. I don't even know what point eventually some friends who hadn't seen or heard from me in some time came to check on me. I must have been in rough shape. Half the house was destroyed. My hands were just a bleeding mess from smashing things. I think there were still bits of that lovely Ikea particle board stuck in my knuckles here and there. They took me to a hospital. Intake upgraded me to critical care. That was full, so I had to stay the night in a secure waiting room. The next day a doctor met with me, asked me some questions. He said, in the 13 years I've worked here, you're the most suicidal person I've ever met. I'm honestly surprised you're alive. Will never forget that. I'd never even thought of myself as a suicidal person before. I couldn't help but think dying would be easier than living through what I was feeling. They put me in a psych ward for 3 months. No outside privileges. A merry-go-round of different medications to try and help change my mood. I had no contact with the outside. I wanted it that way. I shut down social media and shut off the phone. I didn't want the friends and family who were so proud of me to see what I had become, a miserable hollow shadow of my former self. The only person I called was her. I asked her to come get me. She never came. It's hard to say what happened next. Eventually the friends who had taken me to the hospital were allowed to see me and visited from time to time. I don't remember moving out of my house. I don't remember what happened to all of my belongings. I don't remember being 28 years old. I have a picture of a birthday somewhere, but no recollection of it. I spent the next year on a lot of prescription drugs that destroyed my memory. Eventually one day I woke up in a bed, in a strange room, in a strange house. I walked out the door to a dining room, where there were no less than 7 Bibles on the table. It scared me. I had no idea where I was. There were keys to a truck parked outside on the table in my bedroom next to what was certainly my computer. A woman stopped by, nursing student, beautiful, talented, caring. She was there to see me, and to my surprise we were dating, had been for a time it would seem. But that was strange for me. I had known her before all of this, but never in this context, and the relationship felt weird and unnatural. The medication had run out, and I was coming out of it, starting to be more present again. Apparently the friend who brought me to the hospital was there when I was discharged and took me with him to his church. I had no place to live, and they set me up with one of their members and had paid 2 months rent for me to stay there. I've never been religious like that in my adult life, and this was strange to me, but at least I wasn't homeless. I just woke up one day with a new life and had to accept that that was the case. And so, like Mario, I started the game over again. I would go on to help the same friend who took me to the hospital through his divorce and to buy a house that we both lived in. The girl and I amicably parted ways a few months later. I started volunteering and went back to school. Officially resigned from the railroad. Some of the people I left behind when I cut all ties with that relationship I still haven't spoken to again since that day. Now I'm sitting here, 6 years later, attempting to create podcasts where people have a safe space in their lives to talk about their struggles and reduce the stigma surrounding them, and launching a Facebook group and YouTube channel aimed at helping people achieve holistic wellness and self-discovery. That's the whole story, and probably the first time I've shared it. Edit. This got way more attention than I was expecting. I'm going to attempt to answer the questions below. I've never received so many, so I'll do my best. Thank you for your support and the silver and hugs, but most importantly for listening. Sometimes it's very strange to think you've gone through something so unbelievable in your life. She was in trauma from a past relationship, and at that time I wanted to help her move on, and in that act I realized that I've fallen in love with her, as she's the one who, despite being in depression, helped me out of my social anxiety. I just couldn't see her suffer, so I proposed to her and got rejected as she wasn't ready to be in another relationship, and since I confessed about love, she got more anxious and our friendship was temporarily over. We didn't talk or have contact for months. Later on, I somehow contacted her. We had a bit of talk and asked how she was doing and learned that she has been shutting herself in her room, minimizing contact with people. I still had romantic feelings for her, but I wanted to be with her and help her move on, so I insisted being friends again. We spent our time like that, and honestly she's the only friend I had. Time passed, and when I saw she's getting back to her normal life, I proposed her again, and she accepted. It was a long way to that day. I've never been happier in my life. It's been 4 years since then, though we have arguments due to different views, but we always come up with a solution to resolve things. And I can say this with certainty, that nobody can love me the way she does. I feel lucky to have her in my life. I was the one who said no. We were high school sweethearts, had actually known each other since first grade, and despite me moving to a different city, we reconnected in high school. I followed him out to college and realized there was a whole other world out there besides the small towns I grew up in. He already had our entire life planned out, and it wasn't until we had dated 3.5 years and he surprised me with a ring and a proposal that I realized he wasn't what I wanted at all. He was lazy, never went to class, didn't stand up for himself, and was codependent. I said no. He then proceeded to literally stalk me. We lived in the same apartment complex, but different units. He would knock on my door all hours of the day. I never answered. He would call and text constantly. This was before you could block numbers on an iPhone. He attempted to break into my roommate's window, and was successful, because she had left it unlocked. I wasn't at the apartment, and he told her I was just trying to get some stuff. The very rare occasions I would open the door. Very shortly after our breakup, he would force his way in, or stick his boot in between the door, so I couldn't close it. I called the cops numerous times, but they never did anything. He would follow me if I left places. At one point, he somehow knew information that I knew he couldn't have known, and found out he had somehow installed a program onto my computer to track all my passwords and keystrokes and activity. That was when I decided to change my phone number. He would leave stuff on our balcony. Letters, gifts, random sheet. He did not stop and would threaten me often by saying he would find out my new phone number eventually. It did get less and less. However, to this day, I still hear from him. I'm married now for almost 4 years, and I've heard that he is also married and has a kid on the way. But a few months ago, he found my extremely obscure Facebook. It's not even my full name. It's half my first name and only my middle name. I have maybe 11 friends on there that he has no connection with. I really only use this FB to be in groups to discuss true crime and ask me to meet up with him for lunch for closure. I blocked him, but I know I'll hear from him again somehow in a few months. It's ridiculous. Honestly, I regret ever dating the guy. I didn't get to hear her say no. Here's the story. I was with my ex-girlfriend for about 6 years. We had a lot of ups and downs, but ultimately we were always able to talk and work things out. Our relationship was not bad to say the least, and I felt like the more time passed the better it was getting. We had sort of similar mindsets, but we did disagreed on certain things. However, we did connect a lot in many hobbies, ideas, and I felt like we were both in the same frequency for the most part. By November of last year, I really felt like our relationship was really good and there were no problems. There came a point where she had an opportunity to go work in Japan like she once did at a certain point in our relationship. However, she said that she does not want to go live alone again and would rather go if I can go live with her, because the first time she did it, I could not live with her since we were not married, and that caused her to have a lot of depression and loneliness. For me to live with her in Japan, even if I don't work for her company, I would have to be married to her, or else the Japanese government basically says no, you can't live here. I started thinking a lot about marriage and how we've been dating for so long, and she always bothered me about how I have to propose to her since she asked me out when we started dating. So I did what I thought was best, and I decided to ask her hand in marriage, or at least attempt, since we were dating for so long, and I really thought I was going to be with her for the rest of my life. I asked multiple family and friends about rings, where to buy, who can make custom rings, what materials, everything. At this point it was December and we were approaching Christmas Day, so I planned on proposing to her on Christmas Day, because both of our favorite holiday was Christmas, because of how much joy it brings, and how it makes people come together. I asked for her ring size discreetly, because I never really had that information. I went on ahead and looked for someone that made custom rings. I went and asked the man to make me a replica of the ring that Howl wears from the Ghibli movie Howl's Moving Castle, because her favorite movie of all time was Howl's Moving Castle, and I wanted to show her how much thought I put into the ring, and I knew that she would wear it for as long as she can. I got the ring. It was perfect, made out of pure silver. She wasn't one to want very fancy things, so she didn't care much about price value, but more about the thought that goes into it. And also I didn't have much money, but the ring was stunning nonetheless. 3 days before Christmas we had an event at a friend's house where it was a mini Christmas get together with the friend group. We went to the event, had a good time, but it was time to go home. We decided to stop by a Wendy's, since we were both hungry, and something came up where we essentially had a sort of argument and disagreement. It was a big disagreement that affected the relationship and our current status, so at the end of the argument, mind you I was not sober, I essentially said, if this is what you want then I think it's best if you find someone else. She replied with, is that what you really think? To which I sort of let out a big sigh and was about to explain to her my thoughts, but ultimately she essentially said okay. She started talking about how she's been watching my actions and how I treat her and what everyone has been telling her on how I treat her, and that the past few months I haven't given her respect she needed. How for every good thing I did, it would be overshadowed by the bad things I would do right after. She didn't want to pretend like things were okay anymore, and proceeded to tell me how unhappy she was for the past few months, and how she had a sudden waking up moment the past few days, that she deserves better. She apologized for the bad timing of her sudden realization, and told me how her choice was influenced with the fact that she felt like I was going to propose, and proceeded to say that if I was going to she will feel really bad, because she just ended the relationship, which I just simply replied with, well, you didn't know so it's not your fault. We were both crying at that point, but it was time for me to get out of the car, because we were at my house and you can only talk about it so much for one night on something that was not going to change. I was living in complete ignorance for the past few months. I thought everything was fine, but obviously it wasn't. I wasn't aware of my actions towards her, or even towards all my friends. I was not being mindful of a lot of things when I should have been. Overall that whole experience was a big lesson for me. It was a lesson that taught me to be more mindful about my actions, to listen to my emotions more, and to be more self-aware of how I'm acting towards others, especially towards the person that I declared my partner. I loved her immensely. If I didn't I wouldn't have gone through the lengths I did to even find a guy that was willing to do my request for the ring, or for everything else I have done for her over the years. She loved me a lot too, but one person can only tolerate so much after a while. I brought her down many times when I should encouraged her. In a way I was her biggest hater when I should have been her #1 fan. She grew a lot over the years while I stayed behind without changing for the better. I'm glad she had that sudden realization. I'm glad things ended, because it helped me grow as a person for these past 7 months. It was very hard at first, but I'm doing better than I did before. To be honest, our relationship should have ended 3 years earlier, but we kept fighting for it. When I look back at it, I realize how we were not as compatible, and how we had many arguments and disagreements. I held her back in many places, just like she held me back in others. We don't hate each other, we actually care for each other very much, but it was obvious that it was better if we were just friends. Again, I'm very glad this happened. I've been able to grow and focus on myself to be a better person, and she as well has been able to grow even more. The moral of the story is stay true to yourself. Focus on what makes you happy without the need of someone else. Be mindful about your actions and listen to your emotions. And if you really care about the other person, Sometimes it's necessary to make the tough decision, but know that in the end it's best for both parties. It will get better. Edit. Wow. Thank you strangers for the gold and silver. This is the first time I ever received these things. I also want to thank everyone for reading the post and for the people that have shared experiences and thoughts. I made some grammar corrections to make it seem like I'm not rambling for some sentences. I tried my best to write this post. Since English is not my first language. Here's some pictures of the ring. Since someone requested to see it. https://unga.com/ I'm a lady, but proposed and got rejected by my ex of 5 years. We started dating at 16 to 17 years old and dates for 5 years. I decided I was ready to take our relationship to the next step, and since we discussed marriage possibilities a lot beforehand, I knew he wanted for me to propose and that he wanted to get married with me. So I planned the perfect way to ask him to marry me. Bought the rings, planned and paid for a 2 days kayak and camping trip so that the two of us would be alone. We rented some camping gear and went on our merry way. After setting our tent and having dinner at the end of the first day, I decided to pop the question in front of the campfire. The first thing he asked me is if I was joking. I said no. He asked if I was for real. I said yes. Then said that he wasn't ready for this kind of things. That he was just a kid. I cried a lot. He didn't even want to see the rings I chose for us. We had an awkward end of our trip, then went back home. We were together for a year after that, but things were different. The fact that he rejected me made me more aware that he was, in fact, still a kid. And I didn't want that at this stage of my life. So I ended the relationship. I've been single for almost a year now, and I honestly feel better. I grew so much as a person in that year, and I'm happy he found someone else who is more to his pace. Let me give y'all some advice from someone who's been indirectly a part of many proposals. I own a gem, mostly diamond, manufacturing corporation and have a high-end retail subsidiary. Although I have been helping out Redditors for a few years now. The question of whether or not you two are getting married is not the surprise. You should discuss marriage and life building with your in detail. Your timelines, your big picture goals, career aspirations, children, where you want to live/move, idealistic family dynamics, and so on. What can you make a surprise? The actual proposal itself is a surprise. The how, where, when, with what, with whom around, and so on. The nuances. Are you going to do it while hiking Everest to symbolize a long journey together? Or are you just going to pop the question in bed because you're chill? Even for the proposal, I would say get some general insight. Does she want you to do it on front of her 40-person family at a reunion or Thanksgiving? Or would she rather do it in private? As for the engagement ring, please, try to have your be part of the engagement ring design process. They are the ones who will be, hopefully, wearing it for life. Make sure it's what they wanted. I generally recommend going ring shopping together. That way there's no goose walk, even with a lesser detail like the ring finger size. Edit. If anyone wants to learn about diamond values for natural whites, natural fancy colored ones, and lab grown ones, natural white diamond, and really just gem grade diamonds in general, natural fancy colored diamonds, lab grown diamonds, and some info on their certifications, more in-depth info on the diamond industry, supply chain, ethics, mining stats. A lot of the shadiness and price gauging occurs at the retail value, which happens to be the point in the supply chain that affects the end consumers the most. I was with my girlfriend for 5 years. I planned a scavenger hunt in a park. At the end was a perfect spot to pop the question. A single bench next to the water right at sunset. The entire hunt should only take 15 minutes. But after about 5 minutes and 5 locations found, she said this is stupid. I said no worries, we don't have to do this if it dumb. Turned out she had plans that night that she did not want to be late for. That night she was with someone else. I found out immediately by a accidental but dial while they're getting down and dirty in a car somewhere. I loved her very much and it crushed me. When she came home in the morning I told her that I felt like there was nothing between us anymore and that I wanted to break up. She cried and carried on how bad a person I was. Her parents, who were very religious, told me how disappointed they were in me and that I was just leading her on. I ate that crow tail and all. A pride and ego swallowing siege. If I said she cheated, her parents would probably have disowned her, so it was my best interest not to say anything, so at least she have a home to go to. I never told her I found out she was cheating. Spent the next 10 years of my life surfing the East Coast and living off couches in exchange for cleaning their homes or being homeless. I did contract remote work making $120k a year, just shoving it in the bank while spending maybe $300 a month on necessities. My hair unkempt, my clothing dirty, torn and tattered. Nice laptop, nice surfboard and a duffel bag half full of my only possessions. It has been wonderful, never been so happy. I know she asked about me one time through her brother. Her parents told them I'm a deadbeat homeless man. I met a girl. She was poor, lived in low-income housing. But she is a hard worker, 2 jobs waiting tables, went to night classes, and had 2 kids from a previous marriage. I asked her how could she love me. I had nothing, just look at me. She did not care. She cleaned me up, cut my hair, offered to buy me some new clothing. She asked me to marry her and I did. I bought her a house and a new Toyota van for the kids, and she's not had to work a day after. Next year will be our 10-year anniversary.